Hey everyone, welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hmm.
We're going to be tackling organizational theory today,
Ooh.
which, some people might think, oh, that sounds boring, but it's actually super relevant to your everyday lives.
Yeah.
You think about all the organizations you're part of, whether it's work, school, even just, online communities.
Exactly. And like getting a handle on this stuff, it can really be like having X-ray vision for all these systems you're part of.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, you start to see, why those decisions are made, why people are acting the way they are, and how you can navigate all that stuff, more smoothly.
So it's not just like for business school, it's like
Yeah.
for life.
Totally. Yeah, it's like for understanding how the world works.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and one of the most interesting things that our sources are pointing out is how much the world of work is changing these days.
Right.
You've got digital nomads, the gig economy, even like those traditional companies are having to adapt like crazy.
Yeah, like that example we had in the source material about the company trying to figure out this whole hybrid work model.
Right.
It feels like managers need like a whole new set of skills to even like deal with that kind of change.
Totally. And that's where this idea of sense making comes in.
Okay.
It's not just about telling people what to do anymore. It's about helping them understand why those changes are happening.
Oh, so it's not just like we're going hybrid now. It's like, here's what that means.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like painting that picture. What does it look like and why is this good for you?
Yeah.
The manager in that hybrid example, they might talk about the data they have on productivity, address people's worries about staying connected, maybe even share some success stories from other places.
Right.
It's all about connecting those dots,
It's like when you finally like get something you're learning, you're like, ah, okay, I get it now.
Totally, yeah.
So the managers are kind of like facilitating that for their team.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, they're building a bridge between that old way and the new way.
Okay, I like that.
And that's how everyone understands it and can move forward together.
Cool.
Yeah. And sometimes, those managers, they have to make those judgment calls with not all the information.
Right, and that's that bounded rationality, right?
Exactly.
Where you just can't know everything before making the decision.
Right. So they often are aiming for a solution that's good enough.
Good enough, yeah.
Which is this concept called satisficing.
Satisficing.
Yeah. So it's like finding that best option within the limits of what you have. Like the time, the information, and the resources.
It's like when you're trying to pick a movie to watch with your friends.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes you just got to go with the one that everyone hates the least.
Exactly.
Even if it's not anybody's favorite.
Perfect analogy, and this good enough idea that actually ties into a bigger trend that our sources are talking about, which is this thing called new public management.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, so it's basically applying like business thinking to the public sector.
Yeah.
So like treating citizens more like customers and focusing on efficiency and results.
So like how the DMV is trying to, streamline everything and maybe even get some good Yelp reviews.
Exactly, you got it.
Okay.
So it's like a shift from that rigid bureaucracy to something that's a little bit more flexible, more outcome oriented.
Okay, so we've got this changing landscape of work. We've got these managers that need these new skills like sense making. But what about the people in these organizations? Like, how do we even understand their behavior?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Our sources are digging into the psychology of all this, and it starts with just understanding how we perceive the world around us.
Right, because everybody brings their own stuff to work their baggage.
Exactly.
You've got your biases, your experiences, your way of seeing things.
Exactly. And psychologists call those mental frameworks schemas.
Schemas, okay.
Yeah, they help us organize all that information and make sense of things quickly.
Right.
But sometimes they can lead to those blind spots.
Like that unconscious bias training you hear about.
Like your brain is taking these shortcuts, but sometimes it takes you down the wrong path.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for managers to be aware of those potential biases.
Oh, totally. Especially when it comes to like hiring or giving people feedback.
Exactly.
Yeah, our sources were also talking about attribution theory, like how we explain why people do what they do.
Oh, yeah, you remember that example with the employee who was missing all his deadlines?
Oh, yeah.
At first, the manager thought, oh, they're just lazy. They're not motivated.
Yeah.
So that was dispositional attribution, blaming it on their personality.
Right.
But then they found out that actually the employee was totally overwhelmed and didn't have the support they needed.
So it was actually like a situational thing.
Exactly. A situational attribution, blaming it on the circumstances.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a total light bulb moment for that manager.
Oh, wow.
And it shows how important it is to pause, get more information, and really understand the context before you jump to conclusions.
Don't attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity. Exactly, or in this case, lack of support.
Right, exactly.
And it's a perfect example of why emotional intelligence is so crucial.
Okay, I've heard that term a lot. But what does it actually mean at work?
Yeah, so it's about being able to understand and manage emotions, both your own and other people's.
Okay.
It's about reading the room, building trust, and navigating those tricky conflicts effectively.
So it's less about being touchy-feely and more about being, like, aware of what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like having that sharp awareness of all the emotional stuff that's always present.
That makes sense.
And it's key for creating a good work environment, one where people feel heard and respected.
This is making me realize managing people is a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah.
It's not just about telling people what to do.
Right.
It's about understanding them and motivating them and creating the conditions where they can actually do their best work.
Exactly. And that brings us to the strategic side of all this,
Right.
which is where human resources comes in.
HR. But HR sometimes gets a bad rap.
Right?
Like it's all about paperwork and rules.
Totally. But our sources are making it really clear that it's way more than that.
Okay.
It's about aligning those needs of the employees with the goals of the organization.
Okay.
So think of it as the bridge, between the person and the company.
So it's not just about hiring and firing. It's about making a place where people actually want to work.
Exactly. Yeah, HR is becoming way more strategic these days.
Okay.
They're focusing on stuff like diversity and inclusion, employee engagement, work-life balance, all that stuff.
And they're using data to figure out what works, right?
Exactly, like that example in the source material with a company that had really low morale.
Uh-huh.
Through surveys and analysis, HR was able to figure out that the employees were feeling undervalued and like they didn't have a clear career path.
Oh, so they weren't just like, oh, let's have a pizza party, they'll fix it.
Exactly. Yeah, they were digging deeper.
They were going for the root of the problem.
Totally. And they actually put in place some targeted solutions, like a new system for performance management,
Right.
with clear expectations and feedback. And they even had mentorship programs for growth.
Oh, wow. So did that actually work?
It did. Yeah. Employees felt more seen, more supported, and it led to better morale and productivity.
So it's a good example of how HR can make a real difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Strategic HR.
Okay, so we've got sense making, we've got individual psychology, we've got this strategic role of HR, but there's another layer here, right? Like this stuff we don't always talk about, power and politics.
You read my mind. Those are definitely crucial pieces of the puzzle, and our sources are diving right in.
Okay.
They talk about this concept of soft domination.
Soft domination. What is that?
It's basically a more subtle form of control,
Yeah.
compared to the traditional hierarchy.
Okay, so instead of your boss like literally telling you what to do, it's more about like the unspoken rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, think about dress codes, performance metrics, even the language they use in those company-wide emails.
Oh, yeah?
It all subtly guides, how people act and what they think is important.
It's like this invisible hand guiding people.
All right. And speaking of invisible hands, what about that concept of concerted control?
Concerted control.
Yeah, this one's interesting. So that's where the pressure's coming from your peers, not just your boss.
Okay.
So think about a team where everyone's really dedicated to the same goal.
Mhm.
They might not need a ton of supervision because they're keeping each other accountable.
Which sounds good, but I can also see how that could go wrong.
Totally. Yeah,
Like, what if the team norms are actually bad?
that's a great point. And it shows how important it is to have ethical leadership and a healthy culture.
Right.
You need to be mindful of even those things that seem positive on the surface.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of technology and control, what about that term from the source material, the information panopticon?
Oh, yeah, that one sounds a little creepy.
Yeah, it does.
Basically, it's describing how technology is being used more and more for surveillance at work.
Oh, so like the employee monitoring software, keystroke tracking, all that Big Brother stuff.
Exactly. And while it might be framed as, improving security or productivity, it does raise some serious questions about privacy, and how much autonomy people really have.
Yeah, totally. It's a tough one for sure.
Right, it's a tightrope walk.
It is.
And that brings us back to that example of the manager putting in place that new project management tool.
Right, where some of the employees were feeling like it was micromanaging.
Totally.
Yeah, too much.
So the manager had to be really careful.
Oh, yeah.
Using sense-making to frame the tool as a way to work better together.
Right.
Not just a way to watch everybody's every move.
Yeah, so it's not just about the tech itself. It's about how it's presented to the employees.
You got it.
And how it impacts them.
It's a perfect example of how understanding all these concepts can help managers navigate these tricky situations.
This has been a really interesting look at this, power and politics side of things.
Yeah.
But it makes me realize how important good communication is in organizations.
Couldn't agree more. Our sources definitely highlight that communication is like the lifeblood, you know?
Yeah.
Keeps everything running.
But it's not just about sending emails and having meetings, right?
Oh, definitely not. There are all these different levels of communication happening all the time.
Okay.
So think about intra-organizational communication. You
Yeah.
know, that's all the stuff within the organization itself.
Okay, within the organization.
And then you've got inter-organizational communication, which is like between different organizations.
Okay.
And then you've got mass communication, which is reaching that big public audience.
So like memos versus partnerships versus marketing.
Exactly. Each one has its own goals and its own audience.
That makes sense. Okay.
And then there's this really interesting concept called polyphony.
Polyphony, okay.
Yeah, it basically highlights how important it is to navigate all those different voices and perspectives.
So like recognizing that there's not just one right way of thinking. Different people are going to have different views.
Exactly. Organizations really need to be able to listen to and consider all those different viewpoints.
Right, especially in today's world where everything's so global and interconnected.
Totally. Like that example in our sources about the company that was launching a new product globally.
Oh, yeah?
You know, they had to coordinate those internal teams, work with all their partners, get that message out to the whole world.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah, it's a real juggling act.
Yeah.
They had to be really strategic, using different channels and tailoring that message for different groups.
Yeah.
But that key was recognizing the importance of that polyphony.
Okay.
You know, they made sure to get feedback from everybody, employees, partners, even customers, just to make sure they weren't missing anything important.
So it's not just about like sending out the message, it's about having a conversation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that complexity of communication and doing it in a way that's strategic and ethical.
Okay. This has been a really interesting look at communication and how important it is.
Yeah.
And it's making me think about all the changes that are happening with knowledge and information these days.
Yeah.
Like, how do these organizations keep up with everything when it's changing so fast?
That's a great question. And that leads us perfectly into the world of knowledge management and organizational learning.
Perfect. Okay, so remind me about the difference between explicit and tacit knowledge.
Okay, so think of explicit knowledge as all that stuff you can write down, you know,
Yeah.
like instructions in a manual or a formula in a textbook.
Yeah, the easy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's codified. It's easily shared.
Okay, so what about the stuff that's not so easy?
So that's the tacit knowledge.
Tacit, okay.
Yeah, that's the stuff that's embedded in experience, you know, intuition, know-how.
Okay.
It's harder to explain because it's often unconscious or really specific to a situation.
So like a chef who just knows when a dish is done, even if they can't explain why.
Exactly. And companies are starting to understand that both kinds of knowledge are really important.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So our sources were talking about organizational learning as this process of adapting and improving through experience.
Right.
But it sounds like there are different levels of learning that can happen.
Yeah, they actually break it down into single loop learning and double loop learning.
Okay. Help me keep the loops straight. What's the difference?
So single loop learning is about solving problems within the existing system.
Okay.
So you identify that error, you correct it, and you move on. Like fine-tuning a machine.
So if a restaurant keeps messing up orders, they put in a new system. That's fixing it in the system.
Exactly, you got it.
Okay.
But then you've got double loop learning, and that's about questioning the system itself.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, you're not just fixing the problem, you're asking, why does this problem even exist?
Oh, okay.
So you're challenging assumptions, and you might even change the whole system.
So instead of just fixing that order system, they rethink the whole kitchen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going deeper. You're asking those why questions to get to that root cause.
Okay. And our sources gave that example of the healthcare organization that was trying to improve patient care.
Oh, right.
And they were finding errors because of bad communication between teams.
Yeah, they actually started with single loop learning.
Okay.
So they standardized those reporting procedures and did a bunch of training.
But they realized that wasn't enough.
They did. They had to go deeper.
Okay.
They started asking, why is there this bad communication in the first place?
Right.
And they realized it wasn't just about the procedures.
Okay.
It was about these power dynamics and a lack of trust between departments.
Oh, so they had to address the cultural stuff.
Exactly.
To really fix the communication.
Right. And by creating a more collaborative and transparent environment, they were able to get to the root of the problem and improve patient care.
It's really highlighting how important it is to be able to learn and adapt.
Absolutely. And especially in today's fast-paced world, you have to learn and adapt to survive.
So true. Okay. This has been a really fascinating look at knowledge management and learning. But it also makes me think about this pressure that organizations are under to innovate and stay ahead of the curve.
Totally.
So how do they do that while also using what they already know?
That's a brilliant question, and it brings us to the heart of managing innovation and change.
Okay, cool. And this is where knowledge exploration and knowledge exploitation come into play.
You got it. Our sources really emphasize how important it is to balance these two approaches.
Okay.
So knowledge exploitation, that's about refining and optimizing what you already know.
Okay.
It's all about efficiency and making the most of your existing resources.
So a company that's constantly tweaking its product,
Exactly.
making it better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah, they're exploiting that knowledge they have.
Okay.
But they also need to be doing some knowledge exploration,
Okay.
which is about looking for new ideas, experimenting, and taking those risks.
So that same company might also be investing in research and development,
Exactly.
trying out new markets,
Yeah,
maybe even creating totally new products.
you got it. And finding that balance between those two can determine if they're successful or not.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Our sources also talked about communities of practice as a way to boost innovation.
Oh, yeah.
What are those again?
So those are groups of people who share a common interest or expertise, and they get together to learn from each other, share tips and tricks, and come up with new ideas.
So like a group of nurses from different hospitals
Yeah.
getting together to talk about patient care.
Exactly. Or coders sharing tips about building websites.
Oh, yeah.
It's all about breaking down those silos and using that collective knowledge.
I love that.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
So there was that example in our sources about the company that was trying to roll out this new digital platform
Right.
to replace their old system.
Totally.
And the employees were not happy about it.
No, they weren't. There was a big learning curve.
Yeah,
People were frustrated.
for sure.
But instead of forcing it on everybody, they actually created a community of practice where employees could get together, talk about their challenges, learn from each other, and get that support.
So it was more about like learning from each other than like top-down training.
Exactly. And it was way more effective than just the traditional training.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's another good example of how important it is to bring people along on that journey.
Yeah, not just like, here's the change, deal with it.
Exactly. You got to be more thoughtful.
Yeah, okay. And this also ties into that concept of chaos theory,
Yes, chaos theory.
which sounds a little intimidating.
I know it sounds like we're about to watch Jurassic Park.
Totally. But it's actually really interesting when you think about organizations.
It is, yeah. It recognizes that they're these complex systems
Yeah.
with all these interconnected parts, and even those little changes can have huge effects that you didn't expect.
It's like the butterfly effect.
Exactly.
Butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil. There's a
Yeah.
hurricane in Florida.
Exactly. You got it, Lee. So chaos theory is saying that we can't always predict or control those outcomes.
So what does that mean for managers? Do they just like give up?
No, not at all. It
Uh-huh.
means that they need to be adaptable, flexible, and comfortable with not knowing everything.
So being able to go with the flow
Exactly.
and change directions when things go wrong.
You got it. And going back to that example with the new digital platform,
Okay.
those leaders realized they couldn't plan for every challenge.
Right.
So they built in some flexibility,
Okay.
allowed for changes along the way.
So they embraced the chaos.
They did, and they came out stronger because of it.
It's a good reminder that sometimes you just have to adjust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, even the best plans need to be tweaked.
Okay, this has been a really interesting look at managing innovation and change.
Yeah, it's complex stuff.
It is, but it makes me think about the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
the role of organizations in the world.
Right.
And if they're doing the right thing ethically.
You're hitting on a really important point.
Yeah.
And it's something that all companies are dealing with these days.
Yeah, we're in a time when people are holding them accountable.
Absolutely. Yeah, consumers are way more aware of issues like environmental sustainability, fair labor practices,
Yeah.
ethical sourcing. It's not just about the profit anymore.
Right, it's like there's this expectation that companies should be good,
Exactly.
not just making money.
And that's where stakeholder theory comes in.
Stakeholder theory, okay.
Our sources explain that it's about considering everyone who's affected by a company's actions.
Okay, so not just the shareholders.
Right.
Yeah.
Employees, customers, suppliers, the whole community, the environment.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that organizations are part of this bigger ecosystem
Right.
and that their actions have those ripple effects.
It's like that example with the clothing company that got in trouble for using sweatshops.
Oh, yeah, that backfired big time. And it
Uh.
shows the risk of ignoring your stakeholders.
So what does they do about it?
They actually took it pretty seriously.
Okay.
They launched a whole corporate social responsibility program. They got auditors to make sure things were fair. They were transparent about their suppliers. And they even trained their employees on ethical sourcing.
Wow, so they made some big changes.
They did. They realized that wasn't just about PR, you know?
Right.
They had to actually change how they operated.
That's good.
Yeah, it's a good example of how a crisis can lead to positive change.
It's kind of inspiring, actually.
Yeah, and it shows that doing good and doing well don't have to be separate things.
This has been a really thought-provoking look at the ethics of it all,
Yeah,
but it makes me think about the importance of having those guiding principles, you know?
absolutely. And that brings us to the idea of managing by principles.
Okay, so when we talk about principles, we're not talking about, like, rules that can't be broken.
No, not at all. Our sources emphasize that they're more like guiding stars,
Okay,
a framework for making decisions and leading.
so they're more like guidelines.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
good management is often about balancing competing priorities.
Right, like efficiency
Right.
versus flexibility,
Yes.
authority versus empowerment,
Yeah.
stability versus innovation.
You got it. And by staying true to those core principles, like strategic alignment, accountability, and collaboration leaders
Yeah.
can build systems that are both effective and adaptable.
Okay, I like that. And there was that example of the fast-growing startup.
Oh,
We're
right.
trying to manage all that expansion.
Yeah, they really focused on strategic alignment.
Okay.
So every new hire, every project, every investment had to align with those long-term goals.
So they weren't just chasing whatever was trendy.
Exactly. They had a vision,
Yeah.
and they stuck to it.
Cool. And they also embraced collaboration.
Yes.
They had those cross-functional teams,
Totally, to share knowledge and solve problems together.
like this culture of shared ownership.
Exactly. And when they were low on resources, they relied on accountability.
Okay.
Everyone knew who was responsible for what, and decisions were made transparently.
So by following these principles,
Yeah.
they were able to stay focused, encourage innovation, and manage that growth.
Exactly. They were setting themselves up for success.
This has been a really valuable look at the power of principles,
Yeah.
but it also makes me think about the actual structure of organizations.
Ah, yes, organizational design.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts of it all.
Exactly. It's all about the blueprint of the organization, the roles, responsibilities, relationships, and how it all fits together.
So it's like the architecture of the organization.
Love that analogy.
You need a solid structure if you want the building to stand.
Exactly. And it's about finding that balance between stability and flexibility.
So a well-designed organization can adapt and change
Yes.
while also staying organized.
Exactly. Our sources talk about some key elements like division of labor, coordination mechanisms, and overall complexity.
And those are all influenced by the size of the company, the industry,
Totally.
the world outside.
Absolutely. But one thing we're seeing more and more is that trend toward flatter hierarchies and more network structures.
So those old school top-down pyramids are out.
They are, yeah. Modern organizations are understanding that those hierarchies can be slow and stifle innovation.
Yeah, they can be.
So they're embracing those flatter structures that give employees more power and encourage them to work together.
So less bureaucracy, more teamwork.
Exactly.
Like that example from the sources about the tech companies switching to
Yes,
agile
like
methodologies.
To support that shift, they had to completely redesign their structure.
Whoa. Okay.
They flattened that hierarchy, formed cross-functional teams, and became much more networked.
Less bureaucracy, more empowerment,
Exactly. They realized that structure should follow their strategy.
right?
And to keep up with the market, they needed to be more agile.
So they changed their blueprint.
That's a great way to put it. Organizational design is about making sure that the structure supports the organization's goals.
It all comes back to the goal.
It does, yeah. It's about making sure everything's aligned.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. Every organization's different.
Exactly. It has to be tailored to their specific situation.
This has been a whirlwind tour of organizational theory. We've covered everything from those big changes in the world of work to a psychology of teams to the strategic decisions about HR and design.
And it shows how interconnected all of these concepts are. You
Yeah.
can't really understand organizations without understanding the individuals, the power dynamics, the communication, and the ethical side of things.
You can't just look at one piece.
Right. It's all part of the same puzzle.
It's like I'm seeing organizations with new eyes now.
Oh, I love that.
Like I'm noticing those power dynamics and how companies communicate.
That's fantastic. And remember, organizational theory isn't just about understanding how things are.
Yeah.
It's about imagining how they could be better.
That's so true.
Yeah.
So by understanding these principles, we can create organizations that are better, more ethical, more equitable, and more effective.
Absolutely. It's about using this knowledge to make real change. And I think that's what's so exciting about all this.
Yeah,
And that's a key takeaway. You know, there's not like this one perfect design for every organization. It really depends on their goals, their situation, their culture.
you know, It has to be tailored.
Exactly.
Wow. This has been a lot.
It has.
We've gone from these big changes in the world of work to the psychology of individuals and teams to HR and organizational design.
And it really highlights how interconnected all these things are. You can't understand organizations without considering the people, the power, the communication, the ethics.
Yeah.
That's all part of that same puzzle.
It's like I'm seeing organizations in this new way now,
I love that.
like noticing the power dynamics and how they communicate.
That's amazing. And remember, this isn't just about understanding how things are.
Yeah.
It's about how they could be better.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So by understanding these principles, we can work towards creating organizations that are more ethical and more equitable and more effective.
Absolutely. It's about using this knowledge to make positive change.
And I think that's what's so exciting.
It is.
Like all of this.
Yeah, and speaking of positive change, I think it's worth coming back to this idea of sense-making, especially with all these changes happening in the world of work.
Right, because change can be scary.
Yeah.
It could be unsettling, like you're not sure what's going to happen.
Exactly, and that's where sense-making is so important.
Yeah.
Remember that company moving to hybrid work?
Yeah.
The manager's ability to help people understand why this change was happening was so important.
Right.
It wasn't just about telling them the new rules.
Right.
It was about creating a shared understanding.
Like building that bridge.
Exactly, helping them get from the old way to the new way.
And that applies to all kinds of change.
It does, yeah. New technology, restructuring teams, even mergers.
So what can our listeners do
Yeah.
to be better sense makers?
Well, first off, I'd say cultivate that curiosity.
Okay.
Don't just accept things at face value.
Okay.
Ask questions, seek out different perspectives.
Right.
Really try to understand the motivations and the goals behind the changes.
Be like a detective.
Yes.
Love that analogy.
What are the clues telling you?
Exactly.
What's the bigger story? And remember, sense-making is a collaborative process.
Oh.
Talk to your colleagues, talk to your manager, find mentors who can offer some insights.
Right.
And don't be afraid to challenge assumptions or voice concerns constructively.
So it's about speaking up and also listening.
Exactly. It's a two-way street.
Okay.
And if you're in a leadership position, think about creating that culture of transparency and open communication.
Okay.
Explain why you're making decisions. Invite feedback. Involve people in the change process.
So it's not just a skill, it's like a way of being.
I think you're right. It's about approaching this whole thing with a curious mind and really wanting to create understanding.
I love it. Okay, well, we've covered a lot today.
We have.
From the changes in the world of work to the psychology of teams to power dynamics to knowledge management and organizational design.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, and it really shows how complex and dynamic organizations are.
They are, and they're constantly evolving, and so is how we understand them.
Right, and as we start to wrap things up, I'm curious what's resonating with our listeners.
Yeah.
What are you going to apply to your work life?
Yeah.
What are you still thinking about?
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
So head over to our social media.
Yes.
Share your insights.
And be sure to check out those show notes for links to some resources.
This has been a great exploration
It has.
of organizational theory.
I've really enjoyed digging into all this with you.
Me too. And we hope you found it valuable.
Yes.
But before we say goodbye,
Yeah.
I think it's worth thinking about something we talked about earlier.
Oh, okay.
What's on your mind?
Well, we talked a lot about how organizations are changing.
Uh-huh.
But what about the role of individuals within those organizations?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, how does that change?
It's like with remote work and the gig economy and all these new approaches to leadership, it feels like people have more choices now,
Right.
more influence.
It's a really interesting paradox.
Yeah.
On the one hand, organizations are becoming more complex,
Right?
but we're also seeing more decentralization and individual empowerment.
So how do those two things work together?
Right. How do we balance that individual autonomy with the needs of the organization?
Yeah.
That's the big question. And I don't think there's an easy answer,
Right.
but I think it starts with recognizing that people aren't just cogs in a machine.
Yeah.
They're complex individuals with their own motivations and goals and values.
And the companies that get that,
Yeah.
that can make people feel valued,
Yes.
those are the ones that are going to be successful.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between the individual and the collective.
And that's going to be a challenge for a long time.
It will, yeah. It's going to shape the future of organizations.
It's an exciting time
It is,
to
yeah.
be studying and working in this field.
It really is. And I encourage all of our listeners to keep exploring, questioning, challenging, and contributing to this conversation about how we can build better organizations.
I love that.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at this turning point, figuring out what work is going to look like in the future.
It's like We're writing the next chapter of organizational theory, like right now as we speak, but with all
No.
this talk about, individual empowerment and these flatter structures, do you ever worry that, like, organizations are going to lose their direction?
That's a great
Like,
question.
how do they get things done if everyone's kind of doing their own thing?
It is a delicate balance.
Yeah.
You need some structure to keep things clear
Right.
and moving in the right direction, but not so much that it like squashes creativity, you know?
Right. It's like that chaos theory thing we were talking about. Like,
Yeah.
they need to be able to embrace some chaos to actually thrive.
Exactly. You got to be able to adapt and be responsive and change course when things don't go to plan,
Right.
which actually brings up another important point, the role of leadership in all of this.
Yeah, because that old style of command and control,
Yeah.
that doesn't work anymore, right?
It doesn't, you need to be more of a facilitator,
Yeah.
a coach, a mentor.
Okay.
You need to be able to create a shared vision and empower your teams.
So less about giving orders and more about creating the environment for success.
Exactly. And it needs a different set of skills, emotional intelligence, communication, trust building,
Yeah.
inspiring others.
It makes me think about all those examples we've talked about,
Yeah.
like that manager with the hybrid work situation,
Right.
or the company using that community of practice
Yeah.
to implement that new digital platform.
It seems like the best leaders are the ones who really understand the human side of it all.
Right. It all comes back to people.
It does. Yeah. At the end of the day, organizations are made up of people
Totally.
and understanding what makes people tick, what they want, what they need.
Yeah.
That's how you create an organization that works and that people actually want to be a part of.
This whole deep dive has really shown me that organizational theory isn't just some boring academic thing.
It's not.
It's about understanding the world and making it better.
Exactly. It's about having the knowledge and the tools to navigate these complex systems, to make positive change and to build a better future of work, one that's both productive and humane.
Well, I think we've done it.
I think we have.
We've explored the complex world of organizational theory.
We did.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how all of this works.
I'm glad. And I hope our listeners feel the same way.
Yeah, and as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes.
What resonated with you? What questions do you still have?
Head over to our social media.
Let's keep this conversation going.
And don't forget to check out the show notes for all those resources.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
We'll see you next time.